Hello and welcome to Spill the Tea. True Stories, the place where real life is more fascinating than fiction. Sit back, pour yourself a cup of tea, and let's dive into the moments that stay with us forever. We're starting now. Male friendship is a special facet of human connection, one that can only be grasped by those who have felt its irresistible power. For a man, a loyal friend is often closer than a blood brother. True attachment doesn't arise from nothing and isn't shattered by minor disagreements. Therefore, once born, it can last a lifetime, regardless of years and distance. Such a friend for James was a boy 2 years his junior, from a troubled family. His parents often found solace in a bottle, leaving the boy and his two younger sisters unsupervised. Eventually, the children ended up in a state-run institution, from which the boy managed to escape after only a couple of weeks. However, that time was enough for the parents, forgetting about their children, to hastily leave their former place of residence. The reason for their sudden departure gave rise to many rumors. The young man flatly refused to return to the state-run institution. He was barely 14 and decided to arrange life on his own in the house abandoned by his parents. The boys who had known him since infancy helped in any way they could, bringing warm clothes and food. For a long time, they tried to hide his escape, but the truth comes out sooner or later. In the end, the supervisory authorities returned the teenager to the state-run institution. Then James managed to persuade his parents to help his childhood friend. His father, Arthur, a former military man, managed to find distant relatives willing to take custody of the boy, and his mother, Margaret, a lawyer by profession, helped gather the necessary papers. From then on, they became more than just friends. People say about such friends, through fire and water together. His parents, of course, weren't thrilled about such a friend, but they didn't voice their concerns to their son. James owed his life to his friend. One day, while walking by the river, they ventured onto the ice, which had thawed considerably, but still seemed quite solid. Taller and heavier, James tried to avoid places where water was seeping through, but it didn't protect him. The large boy in a heavy father's sheepskin coat and felt boots instantly fell through the ice, but fortunately, managed to surface and grab hold of the edge. His clothes quickly became soaked and started pulling him down. His legs cramped from the cold. Fortunately, Billy didn't lose his head in the critical moment. They say that in moments of mortal danger, a person's hidden bodily reserves are unleashed. Apparently, this was just such a case. The thin, short boy firmly grabbed James by the collar of his sheepskin coat and pulled him up. Later, he himself couldn't explain how he managed to pull out his tall friend in waterlogged clothes. Fear multiplied his strength tenfold, and he not only pulled James out, but also dragged him several meters away from the ice hole. They fell onto the snow, trying to catch their breath after the horror they had endured. After a few minutes, Billy raised his head and saw that James was crying, smearing snow and blood from a scrape he'd gotten when he fell across his face. "What's wrong?" Billy asked. "Did you break something?" The small boy was trembling, either from the cold or the shock he had experienced. "What? A wound or something? It's just a scratch," James croaked. "Stop whining. You're a man. Did you finally drown Dad's felt boots? They were Dad's from the army, some kind of trophy. He'll kill me." "He'll kill you, yeah. Stop whimpering, he won't kill you," Billy replied. "Let's go to my place now. You need to dry off, or he'll definitely kill both you and me. Your folks don't like me much as it is, and this way they'll completely forbid us from being friends." "But how will I go with one felt boot?" At that moment, James looked remarkably like a small, helpless child. He thought for a couple of minutes, then took off his own boots and gave them to his friend. He wrapped one of his feet in a scarf and put the wet felt boot on James's foot. In the evening, after drying his clothes as much as possible, Billy returned home. His aunt, Martha, guessed from the muddy tracks in the hallway that the boys had gotten into some kind of trouble, but she didn't scold them or try to find out what happened. She generally paid little attention to her nephew, believing that this way he would become independent faster. And he came down with severe pneumonia, but never admitted what caused it. This was one of their many shared secrets, and James's parents could never find out what had happened. About the missing felt boot, Billy said, "We were trying to dry it on the stove, got distracted playing, didn't notice it burn up." The story was implausible, but James's parents had no choice but to believe it. Martha, who had taken custody of the boy, tried to keep him clothed and shod, but she had no time to concern herself with his moral character, upbringing, or studies. Even the influence of good friends didn't help, and at first he simply stopped informing her of his plans. Then he started staying overnight at acquaintances' places, answering all her remarks with the unchanging phrase, "You're not my mother." The young man committed his first theft at 15, while his friend was diligently preparing to enter military school. The second theft was complicated by an assault on a watchman, and Billy, along with his so-called friends, was sent to a correctional facility for minors. Although he himself had not participated in the assault, the others had implicated him, and he considered denying it to be cowardice. The friendship, which began in the sandbox and endured many trials, didn't break off, but shifted to a different plane, one of memories and rare letters. James continued to be interested in his friend's life and tell him about his own. And although some letters came from military school and others from the correctional facility, the boys still found common topics for conversation. Perhaps that's the beauty of youth, that at this time we are capable of closing our eyes to the insignificant and seeing only the good in people. James's parents were wary of their son's association with a boy of questionable reputation, but they had long since given him the freedom to choose his own friends. He would later give the same freedom of choice to his own children, and he wouldn't regret it. A person either learns to take responsibility or learns to shift it onto others, later blaming everyone around for their life not working out. After military school, James entered a higher military institution, then began to rise rapidly through the ranks. He got married, twins were born into the family, a son and a daughter, and life settled into a calm routine. News from his old friend came less and less often, until it stopped altogether. In his last letters, Billy hardly spoke about himself, only mentioning in passing once that he had been lucky enough to meet a real angel in his life. He himself didn't go into detail, and James decided not to pry. Through his acquaintances, James repeatedly learned that Billy was alive but serving another sentence. There had been many such sentences in his life, and it seemed he had become so accustomed to such an existence that freedom no longer beckoned him. He didn't know how to settle down, how to earn a living. And was there even a point in changing, since everything there was familiar and known? By that time, James's parents, Arthur and Margaret, had passed away, and Martha, who had taken custody of Billy, didn't live long either. Only old acquaintances remained in his hometown, so he hardly ever visited. Several times he had considered selling the apartment, but there were no buyers, and renting it out was risky, as there was no one to look after the tenants, and the likelihood of encountering dishonest people was too high. However, unexpectedly, a former classmate, Susan, decided to organize a reunion, and just at that time, James had a short leave. At a family council, it was decided to give the head of the family a couple of days off from his worries and send him to his hometown. At the same time, he planned to visit his parents' graves and stop by his homeroom teachers. His wife, Maria, didn't go with him, as she had urgent matters at her shop. September 1st was approaching, and the demand for flowers instantly increased. It was necessary to order popular goods. At the station, transferring to the suburban train to his hometown, James noticed an elderly man who struggled to get into the carriage and sat by the window. Something about his appearance seemed surprisingly familiar, and James sat so as not to lose sight of the man, observing him discreetly. It seemed this old man was significantly younger than his years, while the officer himself was barely 40 at the time, the prime of life, as his wife said. They went to the gym together, loved active recreation, and their healthy lifestyle in a warm family atmosphere had a beneficial effect on their appearance. Even among colleagues, James looked significantly younger than many because most military men, upon reaching certain ranks, stopped taking care of themselves, gained weight, and looked simply ridiculous during exercises. He always set an example of excellent physical fitness, easily completing forced marches. His wife, Maria, also often attracted men's attention with her toned figure and perfect appearance, but her husband didn't make scenes. On the contrary, he was proud that his wife was a dream and an ideal for many. Their children were often told that their parents looked like their older brother and sister. The man James was watching closely appeared to be over 60. His gray hair, hollow cheeks covered in stubble, hunched back, and terrible cough gave away his age. There were moments when he almost choked trying to cough, and every half hour he went out to the vestibule, took a drag from a cigarette, held his breath for a long time, and exhaled clouds of acrid smoke. James, who had detested the smell of tobacco and alcohol since childhood, shuddered every time he looked at this man. His father, Arthur, who had never smoked a cigarette or touched alcohol in his life and was a model of decency for his son, had instilled a healthy lifestyle in him. Apparently, this man hadn't been so lucky in life, since he found joy in harmful habits that were destroying his health. The strangest thing was that James, who had an excellent memory for faces, couldn't for the life of him remember the man. He was absolutely certain he had never seen him before, but there was something familiar about his appearance. The man was returning from the vestibule after another smoke break, and unexpectedly their eyes met. Surprisingly, the man's eyes were young, although surrounded by a deep network of wrinkles, and it seemed that he too was struck by the thought of a familiar face. But his memory or his friend's appearance was better, and a genuine joy flashed on the man's face. On impulse, he took a few steps towards him. Then, as if remembering something, his face changed abruptly. He turned around and quickly walked back to the vestibule, and from there into the next carriage. For a few seconds, James was stunned, and then he almost ran to catch up with the man, unable to believe his eyes. Billy! It was his childhood friend, the daredevil, the hooligan, and the brawler. The very one who saved him when he fell through the ice, who couldn't live in the state-run institution, and then spent most of his life in prison. Prematurely aged, hunched, thin, and sick, but it was him. James had no doubt. Despite the completely changed appearance, he recognized his old friend's gaze, direct, slightly impudent. He practically ran through the next two carriages, scanning the passengers as he went, and just then the conductor announced the station stop. He saw through the window that Billy had gotten off the train and was walking quickly towards the village. It was still about half an hour's ride to his hometown, but James couldn't miss the chance to talk to his friend. So, without hesitation, he jumped from the train step and ran after his friend's receding figure. "Billy, stop!" he shouted, and saw his friend quicken his pace upon hearing his name called. Fortunately, being healthy and physically active, James ran fast, and after a couple of minutes, he caught up with his friend, stopping in front of him, blocking his path. "You recognized me too. Why did you run off?" James asked. "Look, man, go on, I don't know you." With these words, Billy tried to walk around him. The smoked-out, hoarse voice resembled his friend's voice, but James was already doubting if he had made a mistake. Maybe he wanted so badly to believe that upon returning to his hometown, he would meet his old friend, that he had mistaken some stranger who reminded him of his friend from afar. No longer so confidently, James addressed the man again. "Billy, come on. I saw how happy you were to see me back there in the carriage. You couldn't not recognize me. Are you mad I didn't write? But it's not my fault I didn't know your address. I wrote as much as I could, and then I tried to find out where you were, how you were. I've lived in the same place for many years. Is that what you're mad about?" "Look, man, I'm not a woman to get mad," the man replied, looking around as if afraid they would be overheard. Then, more quietly, he said, "You shouldn't be seen with me. Go away. Why do you need trouble?" James barely restrained himself from rushing to hug his old friend, despite his warnings. Billy, you old devil! But thank God! I thought I was going crazy. How are you? Pretend you didn't hear the questions, the man said. Keep looking around. Go to the station. The next train is in an hour. You won't get home from here any other way. Are you going to see your parents? No parents. Not for 5 years now. It's a shame. They were good people. And who are you going to see? To them, to their graves. I decided to come for the class reunion. I'll be home if anything. Come by in the evening. I will. With these words, Billy walked on with a quick step, as much as his limp allowed, and James went back to the station. What had happened seemed like a dream, or a very fortunate coincidence, for it was precisely during his rare visit to his hometown that he had the good fortune to see a person with whom fate had parted him many years ago. School years flashed through James's memory like a whirlwind, their friendship with this brave, desperate, and sometimes reckless boy. How many things he came up with. How many times they got into trouble because of him. How many times James brought home and fed his friend, who was hungry as a wolf cub and who always tried to take the best pieces for his sisters. Yes, Billy's life wasn't easy even in his youth, and it seemed to have battered him severely since. He looked like a real old man. James remembered his 70-year-old father, Arthur, shortly before his death, and Billy looked significantly older now. Waiting for the next suburban train, James arrived in his hometown and first thing went to the store. If his friend came in the evening, he needed to be properly welcomed, just like back then in childhood. He remembered that there was a school reunion that day, but decided it could wait. Billy was more important to him. Besides, his behavior had worried him, and calling his former classmate, Susan, he warned her not to expect him at the reunion, citing unforeseen important matters. Susan was visibly upset. It seemed the whole reunion had been organized specifically for him. He even remembered that in school, she had shown him attention. She was an exemplary and prematurely mature girl, while he was still naive about relationships with the opposite sex, with only a military career on his mind. Although, when he met his future wife Maria, he decided that she would someday become his wife. In the evening, there was a quiet knock on the door, and almost immediately the door opened, and Billy entered. Still haven't learned to lock the doors, just like your parents, he smiled, and for a minute he was again the way James remembered him, and they hadn't seen each other for almost a quarter of a century. Yeah, that's my habit, James replied. My wife constantly scolds me. Less so now, she's used to it. Been married a long time. Tell me about yourself. I will. Come on in. I've set up a table for our unexpected meeting. Remember how you used to always try to feed me? You just couldn't accept that I was thin and small, and you were healthy, even though you were younger than me? Billy smiled again, remembering their carefree childhood. I remember, James replied. It's strange who I took after. My parents were thin, but I grew like a weed. Only in military school did I discipline myself, started eating less and spending more time on sports. By the time I got to the higher military institution, I was lean and fit. My children are thin too. Guess I took after the neighbor. Remember the old man who lived on our landing, the fat one? Your parents would have a fit if they heard you. You always blurt things out without thinking. The friends spent half the evening reminiscing and talking. James noted that Billy immediately went for the bottle, which James, who didn't drink himself, had bought just symbolically. Under the influence of the alcohol, Billy became more uninhibited, even a bit rough, although it was clear he was trying to control himself. At the beginning of the evening, he either evaded questions about his life or answered vaguely. After drinking, his tongue loosened, and he recounted the sad story of his life. Listen, Billy began. You've got a wife, kids, a career, and I've got nothing to tell about except changing prisons and committing crimes. The only thing I can be proud of is I never harmed a living soul, didn't even touch animals. And theft. Who among us didn't do it? Just not everyone got caught. And you know about my first stints, when I was young, just stupid. It was hard in prison back then, scary. I wanted to be free, with friends, having adventures, having fun. Only that fun always led back behind bars, and life there is anything but sweet. I won't tell you everything, you don't need to hear it. Only once one of my cellmates got a letter from his sister, and it had her photo in it. She was 22, I was 25. You wouldn't believe how many girls I'd been with, but this one just wounded me right in the heart. I asked permission to write to her, and you won't believe it, she replied. We started corresponding. I even started behaving perfectly. I was desperate to get out to her. I got out. I came to see her, but her parents kicked me out the door. They didn't know about our correspondence. I spent a month knocking on their door, pleading, persuading. I even got a job to prove I'd changed, but they wouldn't budge. In short, I backed off a bit, decided to give them time. I started living a normal life. That was probably the best year of my entire life. I got a job as a loader, I had money, and I spent it all on her, buying her gifts. She refused to take them though, but I had a reason to work, to live a normal life. Her parents only let their guard down 6 months after I arrived, and we started meeting secretly. But everything secret comes to light sooner or later, and the girl got pregnant. Her parents found out. An abortion wasn't possible, she was too far along, and her health was poor. In short, they filed a complaint against me, and I went back to prison. And the girl soon gave birth to my daughter. So you're a father too, congratulations! I'm nothing, Billy replied. I've never seen my daughter, not once. She'll be 15 soon. She doesn't even know my name or who I am at all. Her parents strictly forbade their daughter from telling the girl anything about me. But what about the girl's brother? Didn't you become friends with him in prison? Friends? Yeah, right. As soon as he found out I was going to see her after prison, he ambushed me and marked me with his buddies. Who needs a relative like that? She was smart and beautiful, just finished university. The fact that she replied to my letter back then was nothing short of a miracle. Anyway, my daughter grew up without me, and I could never fix my life. I just kept bouncing from one prison to another. Until one day, I got a letter from the girl. She wrote that she was very sick. I went crazy, honestly. I had 5 years left on my sentence, and the doctors didn't give her more than a year. Do you understand? My beloved. I never loved anyone else. I never had anyone after her. They all seemed the same, brainless, empty. Anyway, I ran away. I ran away so I could see her in time. That's why I got scared when I saw you. Nobody here remembers me anymore, and if they do, they probably wouldn't recognize me. Life knocked me around, but that's okay. At least I'll live my last years free. Even if they look for me, I won't surrender alive. I thought I'd lie low and then figure out how to live. After that, I went straight to the girl. She lived not far from here. I made it. James saw how difficult the story was for Billy. I made it. I went to see her in the hospital for a whole week. Her parents didn't forbid it anymore. They were old, and I wouldn't have harmed her. But they wouldn't let me see my daughter. They only let me look from afar and didn't tell her who I was. The girl passed away. Yes, she burned out like a candle. And soon after, both her parents did too. Her mother only survived her by a week, her heart couldn't take it, and her father by 2. And who is your daughter with now? That's just it, my friend. My daughter is left alone. She's facing the state-run institution. Help me, I'm asking you as a friend. How can I help? I'm nobody to her. Take her under your guardianship. Come up with something. Your parents, remember? They helped me out. They didn't abandon me. But they found relatives. And does your daughter have anyone besides you? And an uncle. I can't. And her uncle drinks. Since he got out of prison, he hasn't been able to live normally. They won't give him a child. I can look for relatives who can arrange guardianship for her. Friend, I'll owe you for the rest of my life. Ask for anything, just don't let her end up in the state-run institution. The rest of the evening, the men spent talking about children and how they could help the girl. Billy, weakened and exhausted, quickly became drunk and fell asleep. James, however, stayed awake for a long time, turning over the events of the past day in his mind and recalling them. Besides the issue with the girl, he had to figure out how to tell his wife and children everything, how they would react, whether they would understand him, whether they would judge him for having such a friend. In the end, James concluded that it was best for them to know nothing. Inquiries could be made without informing them. However, action needed to be taken quickly. In the morning, James called everyone who could possibly help. Various options were suggested, including him taking the girl under his guardianship himself. This option seemed the most sensible. A 15-year-old girl was practically an adult and would be completely independent in a couple of years. He and his wife would look after her. She would get to know her father. In short, he decided to pursue this path. He didn't voice his plans to Billy yet, promised to help, left him some money for the time being, and allowed him to stay in his parents' apartment. The apartment had been empty for many years anyway, and it was time for James to return home. So, how was the reunion? His wife, Maria, greeted him as if he had been away for a year, not just a couple of days. "Oh, fine. Everyone's gotten older, put on weight, become uninteresting, not really anyone to talk to," he lied. The feeling was disgusting. He didn't lie to his wife, he just thought it was better to say nothing than to lie to the face of someone he loved. "No one at all? What about your friend, the one you told me about, I think? We didn't go to school with him. He's older than me. Didn't you see him either?" "No," he lied again. Maria was surprised that her husband had returned thoughtful, quiet, and taciturn. He often went out onto the landing to talk on the phone, was constantly receiving messages, and answered all her questions monosyllabically. Like any woman, she decided that on this trip he had met some old flame, past feelings had flared up, and now he was suffering. Maria didn't want to think about the fact that James had left home more than 25 years ago and hardly ever returned since. Finding what seemed to her the most obvious reason, she didn't consider other possibilities. Meanwhile, things with the guardianship of Billy's daughter were going well. James had managed to arrange a postponement of her placement in the state-run institution, but he needed to go to the guardianship office urgently and bring documents. He told his wife he was being sent on a business trip, but she found train tickets to the same city where he had recently gone for the reunion. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, and Maria became completely convinced her husband was seeing someone. And the next day, she saw him in a store. He was buying clothes, warm teenage clothes. Who could he be buying them for? Their daughter's size was much larger. It seemed he not only had an old flame somewhere, but also a child. Enduring such betrayal was beyond her strength. Her first impulse was to go up to her husband and find everything out. Later, she would often regret not doing so, for then she would have spared herself suffering, uncertainty, and the unknown. But all that would come later. For now, she said nothing to her husband, returned home, and waited for his return with explanations. However, as it turned out, patience and meekness had never been her strong suits, so she decided to find everything out herself. Following her husband, she noted the train number and destination, so she bought a ticket for the same train. To be honest, she regretted giving in to the spur-of-the-moment impulse as soon as she reached the building entrance, but it was too late to turn back. She called their children and warned them that she and their father would be away for a couple of days, and their more perceptive son, Tom, understood from his mother's voice that something was wrong. "Mom, is everything okay? You never go anywhere without us." "Dad has a business trip, and I decided to go with him so I wouldn't be bored. I've accumulated some time off at work." Tom pretended to believe her, but his mother's explanation worried him even more. James, unaware that his poor cover story and his wife's imagination could threaten the existence of their family, was anxiously considering his next steps. The best solution would have been for Billy to surrender, and then for James to pursue adoption himself, but Billy had firmly stated that he would not return to prison. James didn't press him, deciding he would return to that conversation later. At that moment, it couldn't have occurred to him how drastically his life would change. For now, he was simply going to meet the girl, his friend's daughter, who didn't even know who her father really was. Her grandfather and grandmother, who had reluctantly allowed Billy to spend his last week near the girl, had strictly forbidden him from seeing his daughter. And the girl was brought to her mother in such a way that she wouldn't cross paths with her father. James used all his acquaintances and connections, which turned out not to be very many. Since the girl was already quite grown up, he was allowed to arrange guardianship for her, but she could still end up in the state-run institution at any moment. All the property of her grandfather, grandmother, and mother would pass to her, but she could only finalize the necessary documents after she turned 18. Currently, she continued to attend school, but social workers came to look after her. As James was informed, the girl was very independent, quiet, and modest, like her mother and her mother's parents, explained the acquaintance who was helping him with the paperwork. "And do you know who the father is?" Susan asked. "I do. An old friend of mine. He wrote me a letter, asked for help." "And why isn't he doing the paperwork himself?" "He's in prison." James didn't lie about the kind of person the girl's father was, but he didn't mention that Billy had also escaped. "Wonderful! Where did such a friend come from in your squeaky clean biography?" "We don't choose friends in childhood. We just become friends, and then connections form that you can't break. Besides, I owe him my life. Could I really refuse him such a request?" "Oh, that honesty and decency of yours will get you into trouble someday. What did your wife say about all this?" "She's not against it. She doesn't know," James admitted honestly. "And frankly, I don't even know how I'm going to tell her everything." "Are you serious? You're taking an adult girl under your guardianship, a girl who doesn't know you or her father, who recently lost all her relatives, and you haven't even talked to your wife and children. Where will you bring her? Where will she live? What will she wear? How will the school issue be resolved?" "Connections are good, of course, but I can't cover for you indefinitely. My good advice to you is, talk to your wife and tell her everything. Otherwise, you risk changing your life drastically, and it's not guaranteed to be for the better." The acquaintance who was helping with the paperwork was that same former classmate, Susan. Communication with her was a little burdensome for James, as she subtly hinted at a closer relationship, so her concern for his family didn't seem sincere, quite the opposite. But there was sense in her words. Secrets and mysteries from his wife could ruin their perfect marriage. After this conversation, James genuinely wanted to talk to his wife. But that evening, Billy called to find out how things were progressing. During the conversation, he coughed terribly. James didn't like the sound of it and directly asked his friend about his health. "Everything's bad," Billy replied. "That's why I ran. The doctor there only gave me a couple of months. And while I was there, I also found out about the girl's illness. Everything just came together. In short, I'll be following her soon. Thank God I met you then. And now I can die in peace, knowing you won't abandon my daughter." After these words, Billy coughed heavily again, and James understood. He needed to go to his friend urgently. Otherwise, he might not find him alive. Billy had strictly forbidden him from contacting doctors. James arrived a couple of days later, without telling his wife. Just then, his acquaintance, Susan, also informed him that the guardianship documents were ready and he could take the girl in. Only she didn't have any warm clothes. She had grown over the summer and was no longer small. The next day, James bought everything necessary and set off for his hometown. He didn't know then that his wife, Maria, was traveling on the same train and saw the situation completely differently. In the evening, he and Billy discussed what to do next. "Have you seen your daughter at all? Talked to her?" "No," Billy replied. "And there's no point. Here's what I've come up with these past few days. Let's tell her that you're her father." "Right. And my family will kick me out, and no one will believe it anyway," James replied. "At the time she was born, I was living very far away, finished my studies, got my first assignment. The kids were just starting kindergarten. But no one will believe that I could have been cheating on my wife during that time, and I don't want to bring a child into the family and start with a lie." It's better to say I'm a very distant relative, also a lie, but at least it won't threaten my family. We'll figure something out. No, we won't figure anything out ourselves, Billy said. I'll pick her up tomorrow and bring her here. You'll talk to her and tell her everything yourself. No, James replied. But why? Billy genuinely didn't understand why his friend was so insistent. After all, he had loved the girl's mother, and he would have loved her too, but circumstances hadn't allowed it. Because, look at yourself and look at me. What kind of father would you want? A handsome and fit officer or a sick, dying convict? You're silent? Exactly. And I don't want her to have a father like that. It would never occur to me to be ashamed of my parents. That's because you got parents like that, and I was ashamed from childhood. Always drunk, dirty, abandoning me and my sisters. Even though I lived with my aunt, I still went down the wrong path, and as for my sisters, there's nothing to say. They couldn't make a life for themselves. James didn't ask what Billy meant when he spoke of his sisters. He himself barely remembered them. The girls were no more than 5 when they were taken to the state-run institution, and they never returned home. Billy had visited them several times, but always came back looking utterly depressed. Life in the state-run institution was never sweet, and certainly not for 2 little girls. She didn't have a father at all, Billy said. They told me she's a quiet and modest girl. Tell her the truth, don't hide it, it will be easier for you. At that moment, there was a knock at the door, and both men jumped up from their seats as if on command. 2 hours earlier, his wife Maria had gotten off the train at the station, following her husband. Since she didn't know where he was going, she decided not to lose sight of him. He transferred to a suburban train. She settled behind him, guessing he was going to his hometown. She had never visited her husband's parents' place, so she was afraid of getting lost in an unfamiliar city. Her husband seemed so deeply engrossed in his own thoughts that he paid no attention to anything around him. A couple of times, he almost noticed his wife, his gaze sliding over her indifferently. He seemed to have dimmed over the past few days, turning from cheerful and lively into thoughtful and gloomy. Seeing her husband enter the entrance of one of the buildings again, and then the apartment on the 2nd floor, Maria decided to sit on a bench and think. She needed to calm down, collect her thoughts, and decide how to start the conversation and explain her presence in her husband's hometown. After sitting for about half an hour, she decided to go up to the apartment and talk to her husband. After all, sitting here, she wouldn't find anything out. If he was there with a woman, then so be it, they would get a divorce. She loved her husband, but she would never agree to share him with anyone. Maria had never thought that climbing a couple of dozen steps would be such a difficult task for her. Her legs completely refused to obey, her hands became cold as ice, and her temples began to throb. Gathering her strength, she raised her hand and knocked. Muffled voices could be heard inside the apartment, which fell silent after her knock. They both got up as if on command, exchanged silent glances, trying to figure out who could be knocking on an apartment that had been empty for many years. "Are you expecting someone?" James asked quietly. "Are you crazy or something? I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. I've been covering my tracks for months, taking one train, then another, traveling by commuter trains, by buses, so they wouldn't track me. In the end, I didn't show my face outside that apartment. Maybe it's someone for you. That former classmate of yours who won't leave you alone? Or one of the neighbors? Well, maybe, although I haven't really talked to anyone and I asked them to call before coming. You hide and I'll open it. If they're here for me, I'll jump from the balcony. Where are you going? You can barely walk. Sit down, don't move. If it were the police, they probably wouldn't be so polite, knocking on the door and waiting for an answer. Billy, naturally, decided it was the police who had come for him, and rushing to the balcony, he began calculating if he could run after jumping from the 2nd floor. James, realizing what his friend was about to do, silently grabbed him and pushed him into the room that had once been his parents' bedroom. It locked from the inside, and the windows faced a quiet courtyard. "Sit quietly and don't do anything foolish. Maybe a neighbor saw me." "I'm not going back to prison," Billy shouted. "They can shoot me during the arrest attempt, but I won't go back there." "Sit still. Maybe you'll get lucky." James quietly closed the door and headed for the front door. The peephole didn't allow him to make out the figures outside, but it was clear they weren't police and they hadn't come for Billy. Imagine his surprise when, opening the door, he found his wife Maria on the doorstep, who had so shamelessly lied about the reason for her trip yesterday, and from whom he had been concealing the fact that another child would soon be joining their home for several days now. "What are you doing here?" James asked. "I was about to ask you the same question," Maria replied. "Another business trip?" "I left." Seeing his wife's eyes, he realized he couldn't and didn't want to lie to her anymore. "Come in, I'll tell you everything now, and then you can decide." Letting his wife into the apartment and closing the door behind her, he went to the small room and knocked on the door of his parents' bedroom. "Billy, come out, it's for me." "Billy, yes, my childhood friend, I told you about him," he said, gesturing towards his friend who was coming out of the room. It was noticeable that Maria was surprised by Billy's appearance. "You said he was older than you, but I didn't think he was old enough to be your father." "Hello," Billy said. "I'm only 2 years older. Life has just been rough." "Sit down," James said to his wife. "I'll tell you everything now. I'll just make you some tea. You're shivering." Only now did Maria notice she was trembling with cold, and her hands hadn't warmed up. Apparently, she hadn't expected to sit in light clothing in the cold for half an hour. For the next hour, James and Billy took turns telling her about the circumstances that had brought them together in this apartment today. Maria listened, unable to believe her ears. On the one hand, she was relieved that her fears about a mistress hadn't been confirmed. On the other hand, she was surprised that her husband had made such an important and responsible decision without informing her. She also honestly shared her fears and thoughts about a mistress. Now that the reason for her husband's mysterious behavior was known, Maria even felt a little awkward about her doubts. "So, my dear," James said, "we now have an important decision to make, to take another child into our family." "You've already made that decision," Maria replied. "We need to decide how to tell the girl who we are and who her real father is. By the way, you haven't called her by name even once." "I didn't know it," Billy said. "They forbade me from even mentioning her, so as not to upset her mother, and her mother barely spoke due to the medication and hardly recognized me." "I know," James said. "They gave me all her details. I just wanted to introduce her to you tomorrow. Well, the girl is named the same as her father." A whole range of emotions, overwhelming him at that moment, was reflected in Billy's eyes. It had been a long time since James had seen men cry. Tough military men, his friends and colleagues, didn't allow themselves such weakness. His father, Arthur, also considered tears a disgrace for a man his whole life. Billy looked at his friend with eyes full of tears and couldn't hold them back. His beloved, his only beloved, had given their daughter his name, Billy. Billy couldn't control his emotions for a long time. Maria even had to rummage through her purse for a sedative pill, under the influence of which he quickly fell asleep. And she and her husband had a long and serious conversation ahead of them. Maria didn't want arguments, shouting, and scandals. She understood her husband couldn't have acted differently, but his secrecy hurt her. He had been silent for so many days, deciding things, figuring things out, although he had never kept secrets from his wife before. The only exception was his work. She knew absolutely nothing about it and had never been interested in it. Otherwise, they had no secrets from each other. Over their many years of marriage, they had managed to maintain a wonderful relationship. They had met when James was still a cadet at military school. He was handsome, tall, athletic, and many girls had their eyes on him, but he chose her. She attended a school next to his academy, girls from her class often went to dances at neighboring community centers, hoping to meet a handsome cadet. But military boys held no interest for her, and she didn't consider herself old enough to date. James noticed her when she was strolling along the embankment with her friends. He singled her out for her modest appearance. Among all the girls, only she had long hair and a simple dress. However, approaching her proved not to be the easiest task. He even volunteered to paint the famous red stripes on the monument. This was how the cadets celebrated their graduation each year. They didn't dare entrust this responsible task to just anyone. Only the most daring took it on. James was one of the well-behaved ones, who were never allowed to do such things, but he wanted to impress the girl he liked, so he volunteered. When James entered a higher military institution after graduating from the academy, the girl gathered her courage and went to study in the same city. Her parents supported her decision and never regretted allowing their daughter to enter a pedagogical college after the 9th grade, after which she went to a university located near the institution James had entered. The young people decided to get married in their second year. Everyone told them that such early marriages often ended in separation, but they loved each other so much that they simply ignored such predictions. A year later, twins were born into the young family, a son and a daughter. That's when Maria fully realized how fortunate her choice of a life partner had been. Her husband, despite being at work and studying all day, tried to let his wife get enough sleep at night by getting up with the children, changing diapers. He even learned to prepare formula half asleep, and contrary to popular belief, maternity leave not only didn't test their relationship, it actually strengthened their bond. She was studying extramurally and planned to put the children in kindergarten and go back to work, but her husband suggested she learn something she enjoyed. James's career involved periodic transfers, changing garrisons and military units, but he managed to get a very successful assignment in a large city near the capital. With her teaching degree, Maria initially got a job at a local school, but she couldn't handle the complete lack of free time, the workload, and the constant complaints from superiors and parents. That's when those courses she had taken for her soul came in handy. She found herself in floristry and horticulture. First, she created a beautiful flower garden at home. Then she learned to arrange bouquets and wrap gifts. And 2 years later, she opened a small flower shop. James was fortunate to stay at the same duty station for a long time, and his wife's business slowly but surely grew. She managed to open 2 more shops, expanded the range, and at first, only her husband helped and supported her, and then their children did too. By the age of 40, to the envy of her friends, Maria looked wonderful. She had a beloved and loving husband, and wonderful children. Their son, Tom, decided to follow in his father's footsteps, and their daughter, Sarah, studied design, and overall, her life until recently seemed ideal to her. Her friends were openly envious, her employees never tired of praising and thanking her, and her children delighted her with their successes. And now their marriage was facing a serious test. Maria was relieved that her fears and doubts about his fidelity had not been confirmed, but the fact that he was ready to change their lives so drastically was unsettling. She truly didn't understand how they would live from now on. Essentially, the young girl was a complete stranger to them, and if her husband hadn't agreed to help his old friend, she would have remained a stranger. Now they were taking responsibility for another child with her own character, interests, and who, on top of everything, had recently lost all her relatives. Maria also believed that the girl had the right to know her real father, and she and James decided to try again tomorrow to persuade Billy to tell his daughter everything. Fortunately, finances weren't an issue. Their adult children were already partially financially independent, with their parents only providing money for major purchases. Otherwise, both Tom and Sarah were independent, and for now, Maria tried not to think about how they would react to the new family member. James didn't try to justify himself or come up with other solutions. "My dear, I couldn't have done otherwise. He has no one but me, and it turns out the girl doesn't either," he said. "I didn't tell you because I didn't fully understand what I was getting into myself. After so many years of marriage, Haven't you realized that I'm with you in any situation, good or bad? Maria replied. But now it's not just about us. It's about a girl who doesn't know us at all. It's about our children, who will now have to accept and love a girl they don't know at all. Not to mention that the girl might be against moving in with us. She's an adult. She makes such decisions herself. By the way, how is she herself? Is she ready for a new family? My acquaintance Susan, who helped me gather the guardianship documents, said the girl is in a state of shock but isn't against moving, James replied. As far as I understand, she's quite withdrawn, quiet. It's still unknown whether that's good or bad. Sometimes it's very difficult to reach an understanding with quiet people. We'll manage, I'm sure. You have no idea how often I thank fate for a wife like you, James said. You chose me yourself, Maria replied with a smile. It's late now. We should try to get a couple of hours of sleep. Tomorrow will be a difficult day, plus the journey home. By the way, what about Billy? He's seriously ill. He needs to be in the hospital. The police are looking for him. We can't even call an ambulance. Wanted posters have already appeared around the city. Repeat offender, criminal, and he's just a sick, life-beaten, unfortunate person who doesn't have much time left. I honestly don't know what to do with him. I'm not a little child to worry about. Billy entered unexpectedly, as if he had been standing behind the door for a long time. Nevertheless, your wife is right. You need help. You've already helped me, and you don't owe me anything more. You paid me back long ago for pulling you out of that ice hole back then, and you didn't owe me anything anyway. You would have jumped in after me if I had fallen through. So, tomorrow we'll say goodbye. I'll move too. I'll be around. I'll write. And if not, well, don't remember me badly. James and Maria exchanged glances, understanding that arguing was pointless. Indeed, Billy was capable of deciding how to live his remaining life himself. But James felt uneasy. Are you sure you shouldn't tell her? He asked. After all, you could tell her without mentioning prison, say you're very sick, and that's why you can't take her in yourself. No, I don't want to, Billy replied. And to lie, it's better to say nothing at all. It was clear that the man was hesitant, but James didn't push him. The decision, in any case, was his to make. The next morning, leaving Billy in the apartment, James and Maria went to the state-run institution to get the girl. She had been there for several days because the period for gathering guardianship documents had dragged on a bit, and the social workers couldn't leave her alone in the apartment without adult supervision any longer. While they were dealing with the bureaucracy, a short, thin girl quietly entered the room. She looked about 10 or 12 years old. She didn't resemble an adult 15-year-old teenager at all. Her long, light brown hair was braided. James recognized his friend's features in her at first glance. The same eyes, build, hair color. Only Billy had a cheerful, slightly impudent look, while the girl's was sad and thoughtful. She quietly said hello and asked if she could go home to pack her things. Apparently, she had already been informed that she would be living in another city. The girl hardly looked up at him or his wife. The child psychologist who had worked with her after she arrived at the institution reported that her behavior was just the beginning. The realization of loneliness and the loss of loved ones would come later, and it was difficult to predict how she would behave. Having settled all the formalities, James and Maria ordered a taxi to take the girl to her apartment to pack her things. Their departure was planned for late evening, so Maria suggested she visit her friends to say goodbye. I don't have any friends, the girl said quietly. No one to say goodbye to, not really. Yes, I had some in elementary school, but then my grandmother enrolled me in music and art school, ballet, and with several tutors. There was no time left for friends, so they decided it wasn't interesting to be friends with me. How accomplished you are! You dance, you play music, and you study. Yes, I guess, the girl said in a colorless voice. It seemed that her activities didn't bring her any joy, and she felt no pride. At home, she packed photos, a few personal items of hers, her mother's, and her grandparents', and clothes. Maria was surprised that the girl walked past a shelf with numerous medals, cups, and certificates several times without even looking at them, as if she considered them completely insignificant clutter that had no place in a small suitcase. "If you can't fit everything now, we can come back soon to pick up the rest," Maria said. "I know the way now. I can bring you." "It's not necessary," the girl replied. "I'll try to take only the essentials." She paused for a moment and added, "I've never been called anything other than the same name as my father." "If you like it, I'll call you that too," Maria said. "Did you not like me using a diminutive?" "I don't know. It just feels strange." "And do you have children?" The girl showed interest for the first time in those who were to become her family. "Yes, we have adult children, a son and a daughter, twins. They are 20 now. Our son Tom will be in the military, like his father and grandfather, and our daughter Sarah chose a fashionable field, design. She loved to draw very much, just like you. She went to art school. She had a talent for it from a very young age." "I didn't have talent," the girl replied. "My grandfather just wanted to load me up like a workhorse." "I never liked drawing or dancing. I'm not someone who likes to show off in public at all. I'd rather sit quietly in a corner where no one would bother me. I always asked my mom to have a little brother or sister for me. How wonderful it must be to have a brother or sister, especially from birth. You're born with a best friend right away." "But I wouldn't say they became best friends from birth," Maria laughed. "More like they were born with a partner in mischief and a partner in fights." "That's what I meant," the girl said. "I always wanted a big family, but my mom was her parents' only daughter, and I'm her only child too." "And do you know anything about your father?" Maria asked carefully. "Yes, a little. Actually, Mom used to tell me, secretly from Grandpa and Grandma, that he was a good person. He just got into bad circumstances. He loved her, and she believed that her whole life, and said that he loved me too, even though he couldn't see me." "Did she tell you anything else?" "Only that his name is the same as mine." "And would you like to meet him?" "Of course. To be honest, I was hoping your husband was my father, until I learned his name." At that moment, James entered the room. Seeing him, the girl returned to packing her things. "We'll leave you. We won't bother you," Maria said to the girl, and then took her husband by the arm and led him to the kitchen, quietly closing the door behind them. "She knows both about her father and what his name is," Maria said. "You came in at the wrong time. She might have told me something else. The girl is withdrawn, of course, but we can't hide from her that her father is alive and nearby. What if he leaves this world and she never even gets to see him?" "I completely agree with you," James replied. "But what about Billy? Listen, we're the ones who will raise and bring up this girl. We need to think about what's best for her. So, as her guardian, I decided to introduce her to her father. But since my general has decided, what's there for me to argue about?" James smiled, hugging his wife. An hour later, they were climbing the stairs to his parents' apartment. A taxi was waiting for them near the entrance, loaded with several suitcases that Maria had helped pack. She had packed everything that could help the girl adapt to a new place. The girl didn't ask why they had stopped here. It seemed she was under the influence of sedatives. As the psychologist had explained, her psyche had indeed shut itself off from the outside world to cope with the loss more easily, and opening her up and drawing her out of that shell would take a long time and require care. Approaching the door, James opened it and asked his wife and the girl to come in a little later, when he called them. Closing the door behind him, he was surprised by how quiet the apartment was, as if no one was there. Going into the kitchen and room, he found Billy sleeping, lying face to the wall. "What are you doing sleeping in the daytime?" James said quietly, and gently touched his friend's shoulder. Billy didn't respond, so James decided to shake him harder and tried to turn him onto his back. However, this was difficult. His friend seemed to have contracted into a rigid ball. At that moment, James understood what was wrong, and taking Billy's hand, he tried to find a pulse, without much hope. Although from how cold the hand was, it was clear. His friend had quietly passed away in his sleep. Most likely, several hours ago. Rigor mortis had already set in. He couldn't let his wife and the girls see this, so he quickly got up and went out to the landing where they were. From her husband's look, Maria understood. Something bad had happened. Meeting her eyes, James shook his head, explaining everything without words. "I already told you, this is James's parents' apartment," she said to the girl. "He just stopped by to pick up some documents. Go down to the car, I'll catch up with you in a moment." Even a younger child would hardly have believed such a ridiculous explanation, but Maria was incapable of saying anything more. When the girl slammed the entrance door, she turned to her husband with a question. "Am I going alone with her?" "Are you staying for the funeral?" "I guess I'll have to," James replied. "I don't even know what to do about the fact that he's wanted. God forbid they'll arrest me for harboring a fugitive. Say I came to check the apartment and found him. I don't know what else to say. Try to say less, Maria. He left this morning." He felt a lump rising in his throat. His loved ones were leaving, and he couldn't do anything about it. Perhaps there comes a moment in everyone's life when a series of losses begins and it's impossible to get used to it. "Hold on," Maria said. "You need to pull yourself together now. You can let your feelings out later. We're going to the station. Call when you can." Going downstairs, she found the girl standing by the car. "Can I ask something?" "Of course, my dear. Anything. Promise not to lie to me." "I promise," Maria blurted out before she could think. "Why did we come here? Just tell me honestly." Maria realized she couldn't come up with any more lies. "Your biological father lived in this apartment for the last few days," she said. "He lived here until this morning. He passed away. Please accept my condolences. We wanted to introduce you, but we didn't have time." For a few minutes, the girl was bewildered and couldn't say anything. Finally, she composed herself and said, "I want to see him. I won't be scared. I need to see him at least once, to remember him." "Sweetheart, is it worth it?" Maria asked. "He's gone." "Are your parents alive?" "My mother is, yes. My father passed away a long time ago." "Did you see him before he died?" "Of course." "Well, I want to see him at least once." "All right," Maria said. "Let's go to the apartment." They entered quietly. James was already calling the ambulance and the police. He froze with the phone in his hand, stopping mid-sentence, and looked at his wife questioningly. "It's necessary," she told him. She took the girl's hand. "Where is he?" "In the room," James replied. "Not for long. The police will be here soon. You shouldn't be seen." "I'll be quick," the girl said. "Don't worry, I'll just look." However, the girl's courage only lasted long enough for her to cautiously step over the threshold and see the figure on the bed. With a cry, she turned back to Maria and buried her face in her shoulder. Maria hugged the crying girl and quietly led her out of the room, then gently guided her to the car and helped her into the seat. They drove to the station in silence. The girl stopped crying, but occasionally wiped away tears with the edge of her collar. Boarding the train didn't take long. Moreover, Maria was glad that it was already late evening outside. The girl lay down in her seat and soon fell asleep. Maria couldn't sleep. In addition to her heavy thoughts about their future, she was worried about her husband. He not only had to organize the funeral, but also try to prove his non-involvement in the fugitive being in his parents' apartment. In the morning, the train arrived in the city that had become home to her. She and her husband had lived there for a long time, and their children had grown up there. There was still a lot of time until the holidays, during which she had to inform her children about the new family member. The girl woke up early but didn't wake Maria. She just lay there and silently looked out the window. Finally, she said, "Do we still have a long way to go?" "No, less than half an hour." "Why did you take me in? Who am I to you?" "Your father and my husband were friends since childhood," Maria replied. "He asked him to look after you, and my husband didn't think of anything else but to take you under his guardianship. After you turn 18, you will be completely independent and can decide for yourself how to live. Maria intended her words to mean that the girl would be able to make important decisions herself, but the girl interpreted them differently. So you only have to put up with me for 3 years, and that's it? I can just roll away? Roll away, dear. You didn't understand, Maria replied. I only meant that you will become independent, self-sufficient, and we will always try to support you. You can count on us, but you can live however you want. But until then, you'll tolerate me and then kick me out? As far as I understand, you're not at all thrilled about the idea of taking in just anyone, born to just anyone. I saw my father. Mom said he was only 3 years older than her. And that old man I saw yesterday, who is he? My real father or an old man who somehow ended up in your husband's apartment? What's wrong with him? Is he homeless? Was he in prison? What? Maria was struck by the change that had come over the girl overnight. Just yesterday, she was quiet and withdrawn. Today, she had become quite sharp, even rude. I'm not sure I'm the one who should tell you all this, Maria said. Just a couple of days ago, like you, I knew nothing about your father or about you. I actually thought my husband had a mistress in his hometown, and then I saw him buying clothes for you and decided you were his daughter. I bought a train ticket and followed him, and there I met him and your father, and they explained everything to me. To be honest, I was shocked, but I understand my husband. He couldn't have acted differently. And that means we all have to accept this fact and learn to live together. To conflict or to learn to cooperate, that's your decision. You're an adult. We will provide you with a proper quality of life, but the nature of our relationship depends entirely on you. This direct answer seemed to somewhat quell the girl's rising anger, especially since Maria had been warned that such a reaction was normal. Perhaps this way it would be easier for the girl to cope with the pain of losing her loved ones, and Maria, as an adult, had to support her. It's amazing how quickly a complete stranger can become close. Just yesterday, Maria had absolutely no desire to take a stranger's child into her family. But today, she felt so sorry for the girl that she couldn't leave her alone without support in this difficult world. Maria gently took the girl's hand and said, I know you're angry at everyone, including us, because fate has been so cruel to you. If you need to, be angry, let out your emotions, but don't let hatred towards us grow inside you. We sincerely want to help you. As soon as you turn 18, you can claim your parents' property rights and move out from us. Until then, we all need to learn to live together peacefully. And you won't abandon me? The girl's voice trembled. It seemed she was about to cry. No, we won't abandon you if it's up to us alone, Maria replied. Your parents didn't abandon you either. They left not by their own will. Please tell me about my father. My dear, I can't. I know almost nothing about him, Maria said. I can only say he was very ill. That's why he looked that way. James can tell you more. They were friends since childhood. I remember him telling me how your father saved his life. Really? How? Tell me. We've arrived, Maria said. Let me tell you that story at home, and tomorrow we'll go arrange your school enrollment. I never thought I'd go back there again. Did your children study there? Yes, Maria replied. And it's a good school, with strong, experienced teachers. My children got into the universities they chose even without tutors. I had a good school too, but Grandpa and Grandma still hired a bunch of tutors for me. They were looking out for you, Maria said. They wanted you to have a wealth of knowledge from childhood and not turn out like your father. I once overheard them talking. He said he would pay any money for tutors, put me in any schools and clubs, just so my father's genes wouldn't show. And still, he only wanted the best for you. It's just that sometimes adults, wanting to do something good, go a little overboard, not considering the child's wishes. They didn't get home until noon. Maria called her shop and informed them she would be away for a couple of days. She took a day off. Her deputy was surprised but didn't ask questions. In all their years of working together, Maria had only taken sudden days off a couple of times. She loved her work very much and dedicated a lot of time to it. But Maria decided to spend this day with the girl to help her adapt a little. James hadn't called, and this was starting to worry Maria. She was afraid to call herself, afraid of hearing bad news. In the evening, she decided to call their children and inform them that a new member had joined the family. She called their son Tom first. For some reason, it was always easier for her to talk things through with men. Tom's initial reaction was unexpected. "Mom, are you sure this is a good idea?" he asked. "An adult girl with such psychological trauma. What could this lead to? You and Dad were never known for strictness or harshness in parenting. The fact that Sarah and I grew up this way is solely due to your example. But we grew up with you, and this girl didn't. She was raised with strictness. What will happen when she realizes you won't be that strict? 15 is the most difficult age, even when everything in life is calm. And she's lost her whole family." Tom seemed to voice all of Maria's hidden fears. She herself understood everything he was saying. She understood, and was afraid. So she decided to be a little stricter with the girl at first, so she wouldn't take advantage. Their daughter Sarah supported her brother's concerns. She was the livelier, more spirited one of the pair, sometimes even defending her brother. But here, she completely agreed with him. The girl needed to be accustomed to freedom gradually, otherwise, she would harm herself. Maria was surprised that the children didn't oppose their parents' decision and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Apparently, they had long been accustomed to their parents making only well-considered and deliberate decisions. Besides, their mother had said it was their father's decision, which meant arguing was pointless. In the evening, James called. His voice sounded very tired. After he and Maria left, he waited for the ambulance and the police, reporting that he had found an unfamiliar man in the apartment. The death was natural, so the police weren't particularly interested in the discovery, but after lunch, the investigator called and invited him to come in. "Can you imagine? He invited me," James told his wife. "Apparently, professional ethics have reached our valiant police force too. In short, they informed me that the deceased was Billy. He escaped from prison. He came to the apartment, apparently because he had nowhere else to go. Anyway, I took care of the funeral. No one was surprised, especially since I said we were friends in childhood. I'm leaving tomorrow afternoon. The police have no questions for me, no reason for an investigation, and no cause to create problems for me." "Thank God," Maria replied. "I was so worried. And how are things with you?" "Tom called me, sharing his concerns," James said. "I called both of them," Maria replied. They accepted our decision unexpectedly easily, but both said to be stricter with the girl at first. I agree with them, although that's not our usual approach. However, Maria couldn't follow their advice. In the evening, the girl asked to go out for a walk. Maria offered to accompany her, but she flatly refused, citing that she was already an adult and wouldn't be gone long or go far. "I won't go so far from the house that I'll get lost," the girl said. "You have my phone number, and I've memorized your address." "All right," Maria replied. "But try to be back by 7 in the evening. I know that's an early time, but you don't know the city, and besides, our area isn't the safest. Even though you're quite grown up, you look like a little child. When I first saw you, I thought you were no older than 12. Be careful. Do you want me to walk with you?" "No, I want to be alone for a bit." "Okay, but try to keep your phone on." The girl nodded and left the apartment. After 7 in the evening, Maria decided to call herself. The girl's phone was off. After half an hour of fruitless calls, Maria decided to go look for the girl. It was already starting to get dark outside. Rare passers-by hurried home, wrapping their collars against the biting wind. After circling the building, all the nearby parks and courtyards, Maria decided to call her husband. He was just about to board the train home. "What's wrong?" James asked. "The girl is missing," Maria replied. "She asked to go for a walk around the neighborhood. We agreed she'd be back by 7 and her phone would be on. In the end, it's 8:30 and her phone is off. Should I go to the police?" "They won't even take your statement," James replied. "I think this is her way of testing the boundaries. This is exactly what we talked about. We can't let her dictate terms to us, otherwise we won't manage. I'll be there in the morning, and we'll find her together if she doesn't come back sooner." However, even in the morning after James arrived, there was no news from the girl. It was decided to go to the police, as the girl didn't know the city and could be in trouble. James asked his wife, Maria, to wait for him outside, while he went in to see the investigator. "Listen," he said, "could you give me the addresses of places where young people gather in our city? But you said the girl was quiet and modest?" "The girl was only taken from the state-run institution yesterday, and before that, she grew up under total strictness." "I see," the investigator replied. "I'll look for them now. We have quite a few such places, to be honest. It would be better if she didn't end up there. Our local troublemakers quickly turn such sheltered girls into homeless ones." Try to keep a better eye on the child. Having received a printout of addresses, James and Maria decided to start looking for the girl themselves. After visiting several addresses, they realized how incredibly lucky they were with their own children. Not once had their children caused them such intense worry. Both Tom and Sarah grew up active, but not reckless, of course. Like all teenagers, they got into different situations, but their parents never had to look for them in such places or go to the police. James waited for his wife to say that he was the one who had caused all this and dragged her into it. But she, as in many other situations, was supportive and tried to help. They had taken on this responsibility together. Blaming her husband was pointless. In one of the courtyards, on a bench, they found the girl sleeping. They had to make an effort to wake her up. To their surprise, she didn't smell of alcohol. As she later explained herself, she had simply decided to walk and had wandered around the city for almost a day until she fell asleep from exhaustion on the nearest bench. She had turned off her phone deliberately. She wanted to be alone and think. "Didn't you think we'd be worried?" Maria asked. "I did," the girl replied. "I'm not going to apologize." With these words, she turned away to the window and remained silent all the way home. At home, James decided to talk to her himself. "You asked about your father," he began. "Well, listen. I have never seen a more honest and just person, someone ready to go through fire and water for a friend. He himself was willing to go without food for days, just to bring something tasty to his sisters. He pulled me out of the icy water, even though he could have died himself, being half my size. He had a tough life. He fell in with a bad crowd and went to prison. Yes, your father was a criminal, but he knew how to admit his mistakes. In this, you're definitely not like him. I don't see his honesty in you, his openness, his gratitude for kindness, none of the things I valued and loved him for. If you want to live with us, you must live by our rules. Call so we don't worry, keep your promises, obey, be respectful." I understand that you're not thrilled about the idea of living with strangers. If it's that difficult for you, I'll take you back to the state-run institution. Just 3 years and you're free. Go wherever you want, you're your own mistress. But if you want to have a family, loved ones, support, and love, learn to adapt. We didn't force our children to be obedient. They learned from our example. Tom and Sarah aren't against you living with us. My wife and I are ready to give you our attention and care. But if you're going to leave whenever you feel like it, not answer calls, and then not apologize, don't unpack your things. We're going back. I'll give you an hour to think. I'm not rushing you. I'm not persuading you. But you either accept our terms or you don't. With these words, he left and closed the door behind him, not giving the girl a chance to say a word. The hour they gave her to think felt agonizingly long. They could hear her walking around the room, opening and closing her suitcase several times, moving a chair. Maria and James sat silently in the kitchen, exchanging glances at every sound coming from the room. Finally, Maria said, "Are you sure this is the right way?" It's time for her to learn to make decisions. Adults used to do it for her, but at some point, you have to grow up. Some people take many years, while others grow up in a couple of weeks. Her father, it seemed to me, wasn't a child from childhood. He was responsible for his sisters. What happened to him during the years we didn't see each other, I can't judge, but I remember him being mature beyond his years. By the way, I found out what happened to his parents and sisters, James said. When the children were taken away, the parents, in their joy, went on a prolonged drinking binge. The house heating system froze, and they froze to death. I was about 12 then. The adults didn't tell us, and they didn't tell Billy the truth when he ran away from the state-run institution. They lied and said his parents had moved. And his sisters? His sisters repeated their parents' fate. After the state-run institution, they found partners like themselves. Billy mentioned in passing that their lives didn't work out. In short, both are alive but live a lifestyle that is, to put it mildly, dishonest. Both have children in orphanages, so Billy has at least 3 cousins. How did you find that out? The neighbor told me, James replied. She recognized me when I was explaining to the police how Billy could have ended up in my parents' apartment. A cunning old woman, by the way. She immediately realized I was lying to them. She saw me arriving with him and carrying groceries, but she didn't turn us in. So she told me everything. By the way, they all live not far from here. We'll see what the girl decides. Maybe we'll tell her about her relatives. You don't need to. I heard everything. It turned out the girl had been standing behind the door for a long time and had heard the whole conversation. I don't want to live like my father's family. I'm ready to abide by all your conditions, especially since yours are even milder than Grandpa's were. Only Mom used to spoil me. Forgive me. I don't know what came over me. You don't owe me anything at all and could have left me in the state-run institution. 5 years passed. The girl graduated from school with honors and entered a pedagogical institute, majoring in sociology and social work. She wanted to help children like her father had been, to help and protect them from the circumstances they fell into, to give them a chance to become normal people. She kept the promise she made to James and Maria. She was never a problem. She studied, tried hard, obeyed, and didn't talk back. Gradually, she became family to them. The older children also accepted the girl quite warmly. Sarah became friends with her younger sister, often helped her choose outfits, and the girls went on vacation together several times. Tom didn't fully accept the girl for a long time. He was wary of her, expecting trouble. However, he gradually warmed up, significantly helped by the fact that he got married while still studying and had a son. You've become a softie, Sarah often told him, teasing her brother good-naturedly, as he could talk for hours excitedly about what his child could do. You just haven't been in my shoes, Tom replied. Once you have your own, you'll become just as much of a softie, I assure you. Oh, no way, the girl laughed. I don't want to be stuck in diapers and bottles from a young age. My priority is my career and travel. But if I ever feel like having a little child smear porridge on me, I'll gladly use my nephew. In reality, the girl adored the baby and spared no expense or time for his whims. In all the years, they never once regretted taking the girl into their family. After their children finished school and moved out, the house felt empty and quiet. Even though both James and Maria had jobs they loved, the need to care for someone, to look after someone, was felt very keenly. By the time the girl finished school and moved out, a grandson had been born into Tom's family, and the happy grandparents often took him in, giving the young parents a little break. The girl couldn't find the strength to meet her father's relatives for several years. Neither of his sisters showed any interest in her, but their children were very happy that in addition to their parents, they also had normal relatives. The girl tried to visit them more often, give small gifts, and tell them about herself and her life. She often remembered her first day in James and Maria's family. Back then, she was given a choice: a calm life in a family with trust, mutual respect, consideration for interests, love and understanding, or the state-run institution. In the couple of weeks she had spent in that institution, she had understood that you needed to strive to leave there, not return. She made the choice in favor of family and never regretted it. Despite having grown up in a family with a different way of life, she managed to adopt the family values instilled in children by her adoptive parents. When, several years later, she met a wonderful young man and decided to marry him, she first brought him to James and Maria so they could use